morning, everybody. Crappy Mondays. Welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by my fellow Mirror columnist, Roswyn Jones. Morning, Ros.
Morning.
This is, of course, Holocaust Memorial Day, the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. This is the People's Pay-Per-View, remember, so get into the comments. Ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. We will be discussing Holocaust Memorial Day later on in the show. Those of you who are listening on podcast are just going to have to compare the number of Memorial Days that exist with the number of genocides humans have managed to perpetrate since World War II. A quick tip, they don't match up. So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on Holocaust Memorial Day and the visit of 94-year-old death camp survivor Marla Treibich to Auschwitz to, I hope I pronounced her name right, to mark the 80th anniversary of its liberation. More on that in a little bit. But first, I want to go to page 2, where it's a stupid segue, but speaking of liberation, Donald Trump, whose team seems to have spent the past 6 months kicking Keir Starmer, has lavished praise on our Prime Minister, which seems to be odd, not what anyone was expecting. Ros, can you take us through it a bit? Because it seems even number 10 was taken by surprise that this sort of Tango Tyrant was suddenly Keir Starmer's best mate.
I like the Tango Tyrant. I think to me it's sort of like the oldest trick in the kind of tyrant's playbook, really. It's sort of, blow hot, blow cold, make sure nobody knows exactly where you're coming from, confuse people with kind of, praise and then contempt, and sort of it's kind of gaslighting, I think, in a strange sort of way, but also probably plays to the fact that I think the key to Trump and the special relationship really is the royal family, and Trump is obviously desperate to meet the king, desperate to go to the palace, desperate, whatever that part of his sort of Scottish heritage is. He really, what do you give the man who has everything? He can go anywhere he wants in the world. He can do anything. He'd probably go to Mars if he wants to. But the one thing he possibly can't do is be a guest of King Charles. So some of it maybe is kind of crawling a bit to try and get that invitation.
Yeah.
But I think some of it is just keeping that unpredictability going so that, the Labour government never knows quite where to look. The same thing he's just done really effectively to Nigel Farage by 1 minute loving him and the next minute, telling him he's not up to it.
Yeah, it's the classic abuser, isn't it? To be cruel to someone 1 minute, to blame them for all sorts of things, to say it's all their fault, and then the next minute go that I love you and it's fine and we're besties again and everything's dandy. We've all had friendships probably and relationships like that are over for a really good reason. It's very toxic. Keir, if you're watching, tip for you. What do you think, everybody? Do you think that this means that, Donald Trump is massively approving of Keir Starmer? I don't think many people really think that it's genuine, quite. They don't have an awful lot in common, these two, and they don't seem to be naturally on the same page, put it that way. So the things that Trump has accused Starmer of recently, just as a quick off the top of my head, he's accused him of election interference by sending Labour staffers, including you, Ros, you naughty girl, to take part in sort of pushing leaflets through letterboxes in America during the election, because he accused you of election interference. He criticised the Chagos Islands deal and threatens to tear it all up. He's threatened tariffs and more. Team Trump was not considered to be much of a bunch of fans, really, of Keir Starmer. Relations weren't helped when a few weeks ago there was a leak that appeared in the newspapers of their first phone call, which actually happened before Christmas. And it was all about how Downing Street aides were stood around trying not to laugh while Trump was on the phone to Starmer saying basically, that he didn't like wind farms because birds kept flying into them and the coyotes were eating the dead birds and they were all getting fat. And I think Keir Starmer was supposed to reply, well, we don't have many coyotes in the UK and our wind farms are all at sea. So it's not an issue. The sharks get it, I suppose. That was supposed to have not gone down terribly well in Washington. Do you think it's, I suppose it's a question you've already answered in a way, but we know if we don't think it's a genuine rapprochement, we do know that Trump is very thin-skinned. We know he's fairly obvious. He's not exactly a chess player. He's a bully. So he's angling for something, perhaps. But, you know, would there be any other sort of purpose to this love bombing? He's got an awful lot of other problems in the world that he's going to have to deal with. He does need a British ally, despite the fact that we, you know, our special relationship is a bit limp sometimes. He does need Britain. He needs us to keep hold of some of his nukes more than anything else. But, you know, he can't completely piss off everybody, can he?
I mean, I think in the end, Trump is a deal maker, so he'll make a deal wherever he can make a deal. So, assuming that, you know, at the moment he's kind of upsetting, as you say, a lot of other people in the world, having the UK to make those deals with, you know, could be important. But I think the other aspect to that is you've kind of got Musk on the other hand, you know, saying that we should rename the channel the George Washington Strait, or goodness, whatever he wants to call it. So you've also kind of got people in the background maintaining a much more difficult, as a sort of good cop bad cop thing going on. Maybe
maybe that's why he's maintaining some of it. You know, he's got Elon Musk to troll the UK now. So, you know, Trump used to troll everybody. Arguably how he got where he is, but if someone else is doing the trolling for him, he can be the dignified.
Yeah, troll in chief has gone over. Yeah, he's the commander in chief now, so he's busy.
Well, it's a strange dynamic, and we'll have to kind of see a little bit about how that pans out, and whether
I mean, I suppose when you look at particularly X and things at the moment, you just feel as if we're just being kind of colonized from afar. Like all of our discussions, all of the way that we even see things, the people that were calling for, you know, the death penalty last week for Riddick Obama. I'm not saying there wouldn't be some sympathy for that among the British people, but you just feel increasingly that our whole dialogue is just sort of being hijacked and pumped full of a very American rhetoric. As you say, it's like, you know, that idea that coyotes will, you know, suffer because of our wind farms. It's almost, we are just becoming this sort of satellite. Now you know how Canada feels, I think.
Yeah, there is that. But, you know, the question of whether Britain's being colonised by others is one that I think we'll leave to Twitter to argue over the ups and downs and benefits of that. But we had this, of course, the first time Trump was in office as well. There was a lot of, you know, huge amount of American rhetoric going on, and our politics does get reflected by them. One of our viewers there has just suggested maybe the purpose of this is that he wants Britain's backing for some of his more controversial suggestions. So when he's talking about seizing the Panama Canal from Panama, or invading Greenland, Paul says, what does Trump want from Britain? Backing, annexing Canada, Panama, Greenland. You know, maybe he does actually want something out of it, and maybe if somehow we support something which is in Trump's favor, you know, at the UN or NATO or something, that's gonna somehow we'll get some kind of payback for it, that there's a deal to be made. And Starmer is, despite what lots of people think about him, positive or negative, he's quite a ruthless bloke. I think he's prepared to sort of cut people off sometimes. Is he going to do a deal, do you think? Is he going to be that kind of prime minister who would do a bit of quid pro quo with Trump?
I mean, I'm not sure he'd be sort of handing over Greenland or any of those countries, but I think it's interesting that I've noticed something recently among a lot of the tech bros, where they've got this kind of obsessive pioneer mentality, where it's almost like, you know, whether it's going to Mars or taking over different countries, it's like a sort of, it's like an obsession with taking over territory. And I suppose, I mean, part of the job of diplomacy always is to find out what are the things that your opponent or other people want, and, you know, where can you cross over with those people. And I mean, I can't see a sort of natural Venn diagram between Starmer's international ambitions and Trump's, except around peace in the Middle East, and I guess sort of Russia, Ukraine, some of those kind of areas. It's hard to see that we would want, you know, an American expansion in that way. Although, of course, it's in the interest of a lot of the world to make sure that China also don't just get to expand wherever they like all over the globe.
Yeah. And it's one of those things as well, you know, that he's been praising Trump, he's praised Starmer, I should say, for doing a very good job so far, quote unquote. And it's got to be said, that's something of a minority view in the UK. So what do you think, everybody? Do you think Starmer's done a good job? a poll by Ipsos in December said that although he came out ahead by some margin as the preferred Prime Minister to Kemi Badenoch or Nigel Farage, Keir Starmer has only actually got the approval of 27% of voters. And 61% of people think he's not doing very well. They don't like how it's gone so far. So where do you sit, Ros? What are his greatest achievements to date, do you think? Has he got any? What's his greatest failure?
I mean, in some ways, the things that Starmer has sort of succeeded at, I would say, are things that he'd already succeeded at kind of prior to taking office. So, you know, ironically, his record on the grooming gangs, which has been such a source of controversy, but which is kind of stoked by Musk, is actually goes back to his sort of time as the DPP, where he actually, I suppose for me, what's interesting about Starmer is we've had this Prime Minister for a long time in Boris Johnson, who really didn't have a great deal of heft kind of behind him when he came into office. That's putting it kind of mildly. So if you needed someone who could, you know, tell you something in Latin, he'd, you know, be very, very useful. But Starmer's kind of got this great hinterland of work that he's done before. And I think sort of what's interesting about him is in these sort of moments of crisis, so after the riots or around the grooming gangs, there is sometimes this sense of this person who actually has done things in their life, done effective things. And that's where probably some of the ways in which people could feel safer with that kind of Prime Minister might come into play. I think, I mean, for me, the failure of the Labour Party so far is that there's a failure to sort of grip the narrative of kind of what's going on. I think in a lot of ways, the budget was a very Labour budget that we saw. There was loads of stuff in there about workers' rights. The workers' rights stuff is potentially transformative to millions of people's lives. But we don't hear about that, and we're not going to hear about it from, you know, from 98% of the press are right wing or whatever. They're not going to convey those. They don't want those reforms to happen either. So,
but they're not even talking
they've got to be much clever about getting their message out there on things that actually really matter and can make a difference to people's lives.
Yeah. I mean, the press aren't even talking about those reforms in a negative way. That's not being discussed. There's just, you know, Trump and other stuff is just sort of
so much to keep hearing about the private school reforms which affect 4% of the country. That's got nothing to do with anyone. It's literally 4% of the country. They just happen to include a lot of newspaper editors, a lot of reporters, a lot of people, a lot of proprietors, and a lot of people who advertise, you know, in the press. But actually, that's 4% of the country. So why are we spending so much time on that and nothing on some of the other bits and bobs?
Yeah. And what do you think, everybody? Has Keir Starmer done a good job? Has done a bad job? What do you think his achievements are, if there are any? Trump wasn't questioned on the plane which ones he was talking about, but he seems to think that there is something. Maybe he's having some kind of briefing that we're not. Who knows? So he's given Starmer a big old pat on the back. I will have to see how Starmer reacts and what happens. There's some suggestion that there's going to be some kind of meeting at some point. There's going to be some kind of visit from Trump. So we'll have the beast back again. And so will the St Andrews and Scotland are going to have him come around and play golf, I expect. And this time without any Janie Godley, unfortunately. If you can hear some banging, I'm afraid that's Ros's neighbour, who's obviously trying to either get out or express their view of Keir Starmer and whether he's going well or bad. Maybe it's Morse code and we're just failing to interpret it properly. But anyway, we must press on. So today, the only story in town is Holocaust Memorial Day, commemorations at home and abroad. And we've got a little bit of video about Marla Tribeca, who I mentioned earlier, who is a survivor of Belsen and is the only British representative at the commemorations today. Here she is.
Yes, the British soldiers. Yes, well, that was quite amazing. But I didn't really get the full benefit of it but not psychologically, because I was ill.
Oh, I didn't know.
I had typhus, and I didn't really know it was it, but I had already sort of turned the corner and I was getting better. And I remember opening my eyes and my bunk was by the window, and I could see people running, and I didn't wonder why they were running or where they were running to. all I thought about was how had they got the strength to run?
Now that's Marla talking about the moment of liberation when she saw the Allied troops turn up. And of course, despite the fact there were many thousands of people who were dead and who had typhus, as she did, and were starving, they were running towards those soldiers to finally gain liberation and maybe some food and some medical help. Now, for those of you, some of you may have been to Auschwitz, or you may have watched a documentary film which is on Apple TV at the moment called The Commandant's Shadow. You may know the story of Rudolf Höss, who was in charge of that camp and invented much of its machinery of death and human misery. There's a picture of him. He's a lovely chap, isn't he? Now, since he was hanged nearby after the war, his former family home, which was just outside the camp wall, has been a private house. But the people who live there are a bit fed up with, sightseers always coming past. And it's recently been bought by the Counter Extremism Project, which has opened it to the public to look around. And for those benefit those on podcasts, at the moment we're seeing our esteemed colleague Lucy Thornton as she's reporting from inside that house, looking over the walls into the camp, looking through the tunnel that's underneath the house that leads to and from the camp. And it's just a fairly normal Polish house, I suppose, but it's who lived there and what they were doing while they were there. Lucy's been there this weekend, and she's been one of the first to see inside that house and report on it. Ros, can you take us a bit through her report and tell us what she's saying?
Yeah, I mean, I found this report to just be incredibly moving. I know that Lucy says in the report that the charity that took it over wanted to remind people that evil can lurk next door, even in, kind of ordinary homes. And I guess that's the impression that you get. I don't know if this is the same house as the film or the book, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. Certainly it sort of reminds me of that story. I don't know if there are other houses nearby or if this was the house that was based on. But some of the details in our colleague Lucy's report are just, it's the idea that this family, they sort of frosted the windows at the top of the house so the children couldn't see out into the camp. But they point out that they, the wall of the sort of death wall was only 150 yards away, so they would have heard the sound of that all the time, that there was ash that used to float over into the swimming pool and into the garden, and that this guy Rudolf Höss was kind of obsessed with his garden and growing his roses and growing, it's just a sort of grotesque juxtaposition, I suppose, of what, and it's the kind of end of when you dehumanize people to such a degree that you just can't even hear their screams or understand what they're, just even see them as human beings. I think as Maya, the British lady that Lucy's with, who's on the front page of the Mirror today, she just talks about how they were just sort of seen as rats. That's the only way she can sort of imagine what happened. How Auschwitz it's just always the scale of it, isn't it? It's 1.3 million people went in, 1.1 million people were murdered. The systematic to kill that number of people, and that's what makes it a Holocaust, I guess, under that definition. The idea of mass systematic murder. And I think, but the other thing that Maya says in her interview with Lucy that really struck me, I found really moving, was she said, if you gave up hope, you died. And that is something, I don't know. I think those are questions that we can't know, can we? That haven't lived through those circumstances. How do you keep hope? How do you somehow believe that you can survive under those circumstances?
It's the organisation and the industrialisation of what happened there, and the thought of of taking your family, even if that's something you're prepared to do, taking your family to live next door to it, while there's, as you say, this death wall 100 odd yards away, which is where they had the firing squads and where they hanged prisoners and so on, where the ash from the crematoria is falling on your garden and your swimming pool as your children are playing there. Most of us would think, well, that's the last place we take our children. But I think in the case of Höss and so many others, it was something they were proud of, They didn't see any reason to hide it from their children. It was something we're making the world a better place by getting rid of all the ethnic Poles and the communists and the political opponents and the epileptics and the disabled, and they're all going to be gone, and the world's going to be better as a result. And they really didn't quite grasp, I think, how grim it is. So this is what's kind of, this house really is what was described as an example, in the Nuremberg trials, an example of the banality of evil. The simple family home, which had a tunnel underneath, where the man of the house went down to that tunnel every night and raped a prisoner before he washed his hands and went back upstairs to his family. There was a set of striped pajamas from a starving male inmate found in the attic, which they don't know who it belonged to or how he got there. Yet there were these young children raised there with very little idea of what was going on the other side of the wall. And the harsh thing here, Roz, is that I suppose, the first journalists who walked into that camp, the first soldiers and the survivors and the world leaders and everybody else who all vowed it must never happen again, have actually seen genocides repeatedly ever since. Off the top of my head, Rwanda, Kosovo, the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, the Rohingya, Cambodia, Darfur, Sudan. The list goes on. People would talk about Israel and Palestine now, though it doesn't have the same systematized industrialization. Only 3 genocides have been formally recognized as such, which is Srebrenica, Cambodia, and Rwanda, probably because of the extent of the organization. But this seems to be an unfortunate habit of humanity, doesn't it, Ros? What do you think it would take for us to actually learn this lesson when the youngest of survivors, like Milo, of that Holocaust, now in their 90s, this may be one of the last times we can actually hear directly from someone who was there and knows what it's like, because it's being forgotten, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, my sort of, in a previous life, when I used to report on a lot of disasters and emergencies, I reported from Darfur, from Kosovo, from East Timor, from Rwanda, sort of later post-genocide Rwanda. And I think there's something horrific. Like, I think in our generation, obviously we grew up, two of my granddads fought in World War II. We were always taught that this was the war to end all wars. This was like a generational thing that would never happen again in our lifetime. So I can remember being in Sudan, in particular, being in South Sudan and then being in Darfur, and feeling I've had that experience of sitting there trying to say this is a genocide and people telling you it's not a genocide, and how extraordinary that semantic debate feels under those circumstances. When you're kind of going through places with mass graves and that millions of people are being starved to death and millions more are being butchered, and people want to argue with you about whether it's a genocide or whether it isn't a genocide. And I'm sure there are people in the Middle East that feel that very much at this time. I suppose what worries me about how we never learn these lessons, it's not even that we don't learn the lessons, it's that it's almost the opposite of it. And it's difficult because I don't want to sort of dignify Elon Musk by mentioning him in the same breath as the Auschwitz survivors. But what he's done over the weekend, on the eve of the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, to be, appearing at a far right rally, even virtually, to be talking about, his belief that Germans are not responsible for what their grandparents did, which is one of the sort of founding premises of the AfD. Obviously Germans today are not responsible for what happened in Auschwitz or elsewhere, but there has been a collective agreement in Germany that Germans are responsible for what happens now, like what happens in the future, that they're responsible for keeping the collective memory of what happened alive, and they're responsible for how to prevent it happening again. And the idea that Elon Musk would start to interfere in that and to give, his platforms over, his extensive platforms over to the far right, on this anniversary is just, it's actually an obscenity, I think.
Yeah. And it's one of those words as well, genocide, which gets bandied about a lot, and it gets cheapened every time someone accuses someone else of genocide that isn't one, not because of the semantic argument, but when you've had Musk and people on the far right talking about grooming gangs and even a falling birth rate and immigration, and calling all of that and labeling it as a kind of genocide, as this great white replacement theory that the white man is somehow going to get wiped out by the other, and that all of it is a form of genocide, and it isn't, number one. And do you think that when people use it like that, and they're actually using it as a weapon, that word, aren't they? And they're throwing it at other people to try and make them look like the bad guys, and at the same time it cheapens the word and it makes the actual genocides less of a thing because it's used so easily. I don't think I've really got a question about it, apart from the fact I'm agreeing with you. And it's just, I can't believe that we've actually got someone who is in the position of Elon Musk, who is the richest man on earth, who has sorry, I've got some light on my face, I'm trying to move so it's not there, but the richest man on earth, he's got the means of mass communication at his disposal, and he appears to be either a complete idiot or a nasty piece of work, probably a mix of both. He's been to Auschwitz, and there was a survivor that I saw the other day who was talking about, she was there with him and said he was only there for the press thing. He didn't care. My husband, who was a survivor of that, or his family was, going around looking at the showers and the gas chambers and all the rest of it, and being terribly moved by this machinery of death that you can see there, the chimneys and everything else. And Musk just was nothing. There was no emotional response whatever when you stood in Auschwitz. And that just shows someone who has no empathy, no human feeling, no sense of history. And I suppose it's just a factor of having been or being one of or the richest man on earth that you can just say, well, none of this matters to me. Because literally nothing matters to you when you're in that position. But it matters an awful lot to everybody else. And he's driving our debate, isn't he? And just the suggestion that that's a kind of genocide, whatever he thinks is going wrong in the world is a kind of genocide, when he's been there and seen the evidence of an actual genocide, is what gets discussed in our Houses of Parliament. Do you think that we should ignore these people, Ross? Do you think that's where I'm getting to? Should we just say, look, when Donald Trump says something insane, or Elon Musk does something which just everyone would just rather he did not, should we just actually, as a species, go, we're not listening to that, go away, we're not, no, and block him out? Maybe it's our fault, maybe it's the journalists. It's too much fun to report on.
I mean, I think that is in some ways, a sort of existential problem that we're facing, whether on the left or whether as the government at the moment, is to what extent do you keep dignifying these people? How much do you let them disrupt you and kind of throw you off course? So I think actually increasingly the government probably do need to ignore what's coming out of America, because this is going to be non-stop if you think what's been going on just in a matter of days or before he even kind of took over. But on the other hand, the trouble is, and I think we've seen this problem before, that where you don't answer some of those conspiracy theories and conspiracy things, they just start to take root and they start to take hold. And one of the problems is people feel so disempowered at the moment and so sort of lost in the world, that the thing about a conspiracy theory is it can make you feel like actually you have got some power. You understand the world in a way that other people don't. It can make you feel like you're kind of superior to others because you've got this extra knowledge. And one of the worries is if the conspiracy theories start to really, really take root, it can get very difficult to dislodge them, to the point where, obviously you were mentioning earlier when I went to Philadelphia just before the last election, and some of the people that I met there, the level of conspiracy theory, the way it had been absorbed, was so deep that actually you just couldn't do anything about it at that time to remove it. There was no point discussing a fact. I talked about this at the time. There was a conspiracy theory. People kept talking to me about these empty factories, sort of empty buildings, and saying, well, what do you think those are for? And I was thinking, well, they're probably going to be an Amazon warehouse, or they'll be for servers for masks or something like that. And it took me a few days to actually Google what is the conspiracy theory around empty warehouses in Philadelphia or across America. And it was basically the belief that people were going to just get rounded up who disagreed with, multicultural society or LGBTQ rights or something. And they
like Kamala Harris, we're going to round people up and put them in a warehouse.
And put them in a warehouse, yeah.
We're going to do that.
Yeah.
That's like the opposite of what a woke person would do, surely.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, it was a really weird thing. I just thought, why have about 4 people in a row mentioned about the empty warehouses? So what's going on about the empty warehouses? And it was literally because we're all going to be rounded up and taken off because of our non-woke views. And it was just a kind of, the trouble is, if you don't argue against the conspiracy theories or you don't provide the facts, they take root. On the other hand, there's that whole question, there's a brilliant book, I think, is it George Lakoff, called Don't Think of an Elephant, which is about political framing. So if you say to someone, don't think of an elephant, obviously you immediately think of an elephant. So how do you work with political frames to prevent just reinforcing what somebody's saying all the time? So if we keep saying great replacement theory, are we then telling people, oh, what's great replacement theory? And then they look it up and go deep into this conspiracy theory about how white people are being replaced in the Western world. On the other hand, if we don't deal with it, we've got a problem because people are looking at it online anyway. So it's like it is, I think, a really fundamental existential question for politics as we go forward. That's very deep for Monday morning.
It is crazy. That's why it seems to be where we are, unfortunately. And one of our viewers has just said there, conspiracy theories is where people feel that they can have some kind of sense of control in the world. And bear in mind, though conspiracy theory is a fairly modern phrase, that is exactly what led to the Holocaust, the sense that Jews were responsible for the failures of the First World War.
Yeah, the original conspiracy theory, really.
Exactly. And and also that theory has gone back to biblical times as well. Jews are responsible for the death of Jesus and this, that, and the other, and they got massacred in the UK in 13th century and goodness knows what. It's just grim. Now, in this piece that Lucy's written, which we need to get back to, the Counter-Extremism Project chief, Mark Wallace, said that they've been trying to buy that house for years, and they wanted to say basically, it's an ordinary house. It's next door to the largest industrial scale slaughter of people in the world. And they lived this horrible extremist living a life which was ordinary, if not luxurious. And as humans, one thing everyone can relate to is that everybody has a neighbour, but there could be an anti-Semite, an extremist or radical in one of the houses next door, even to the people watching this programme. Now, we've had next door to people horrible neighbours that in recent history, Ros, like Joseph Fritzl, Dominic Pellico, people who have lived very recently and side by side with others in perfectly normal houses, been found out that there are monsters living there after many years. And some of the workers who are turning Hoss's house into a centre for research into extreme and warn in this piece that it's growing, that this sense of hatred next door is actually, it's more real and alive than it has been for many, many years. That we're more aware of it, and the hate that inspired the Holocaust is still with us. Now, there's going to be lots said in the Houses of Parliament today, I expect, to commemorate the victims of the Holocaust. But as always, there will be blame laid at the feet of our politicians, going, well, it's your rhetoric which is causing some of this about immigration or anything else. How much blame can we really lay at the feet of the politicians, Ros, when it's something that ordinary citizens are prepared, as we all know, to think and feel and say and do, increasingly in public as well?
I mean, I guess the sort of classic saying that evil happens when good people do nothing is central to this whole kind of question. And I guess, again, in the case of Dominic Pellico, I mean, that was almost like a sort of collective madness of a whole society and a whole town, wasn't it? Where people are always collaborating, and you see whether it's apartheid South Africa, whether it's all kinds of maybe even parts of South America where people end up collaborating with, drug gangs and cartels, and there's a mixture of fear, there's a mixture of it's not happening to me. Like these are all questions that we have to grapple with. We can't just leave it to politicians, I think.
Yeah.
And I suppose, as you say, that's the power of this kind of the house next door. What if that's your neighbour? What are the things that we have to be brave enough to call out ourselves? Even, and that the hard bit often is calling out in your own side. It's easy to call it out in your enemies, but how do you call out things amongst your friends?
Yeah, or it's in your family and you say you shouldn't be saying stuff like that or something. It's really difficult. People obviously aren't going to accept it all the time either. So it's often easier to say nothing, but look where we get to. Now, thank you for that, Ros. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. It's very difficult to find anything like good news on a day like today, but we have managed to find something. It's a completely different topic. So let's have a mind cleanse and think about this instead. Here it is. Now, I want you to meet Essie. I'm not going to even try pronouncing his last name. I think it's Dutch. This is Britain's latest business mogul who has set up his own publishing house, aged just 5. Now, he wrote his own picture book, aged 3, about the adventures of a baby fox and a jellyfish, of all things. But when no publisher agreed to print it, he has now set up his own publishing arm, obviously with the help of his mum and dad, which is looking for the works of other children to turn into literature as well. Now, he's got to sell 1,000 copies of his book, which is available online, in order to claim the title of youngest published author in the world. So if you want to search out Essie's book called Baby Fox, please do so and buy a copy to try and get him a bit closer to that title. He's looking also for any child under 8 to get in touch with their own books to publish through his new firm. Ros, is this proof that, and I'm not going to make comparisons with our previous stories here, that would be far too trite, but in generally, sometimes getting a knockback is what you need to go on to greater success?
Well, I think I, for one, am delighted to meet our new overlord, Essie, and I look forward to working for him. Sometime in the future. People are always telling us print is dead. Obviously, he's proving the opposite. I think, I mean, that's just, it's a great story. It's really cheered me up. I love the idea. Children's imaginations are incredible. The stories they have, the dreams they have, the ideas they have are brilliant. And the idea of just sort of getting those ideas straight down onto paper and out into books just seems a wonderful idea to me. Yeah,
I know, it is pretty wonderful. I remember my daughter, when she was probably about the same age, wrote a book called The Ship That Sank, and she just put some pages put together and she just coloured it all in. But it was basically about some people who went on a ship, and then the ship sank, and then the mermaid came along and rescued them, and then they took them to a desert island and they thought they were safe, but then one of the passengers turned out to be Darth Vader and killed them all. And there was so many plot twists as you went through it, and it was brilliant. But I did think about trying to get it self-published.
Yeah, now you wish that you published that book, don't you?
Yeah, I didn't do it, but maybe I should have done. I wish I should. I've had at least one copy then I could have had for it. But anyways, wonderful bit of news. Well done, Essie. Good luck to you. If you want to go and buy a copy of his book and try and make the world a slightly better place, feel free. Thank you, Ros, for taking us through all that today. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We've gone a bit later than usual because of what we've been talking about today. We'll be back on Wednesday for another edition of the News Agenda. Until then, everybody, stay safe, take care, don't be a Nazi. Tatty bye.